that 61% of grade 5s can't do simple arithmetic, the addition and subtraction of whole numbers, that 85% of our public clinics are unable to comply, according to the Office of Health Standards Compliance, with basic norms on hygiene, medicines availability, and the like. And each time it's the Black majority that is so heavily dependent on the government for meeting its core needs that suffers the most. If we look now at implementation of the BEE Act in the private sector, even before the Act came into effect in 1999, studies showed that 90% of 150 big companies already had affirmative action programs in place on a voluntary basis, that they were paying 10% to 20% premiums for senior Black staff to attract them into their employ and to retain their services because many others were trying to poach them. And this simply confirmed the extent of the demand for skilled Black people. It didn't point in any way to a racist refusal to employ or promote skilled Black people. The situation that we have at the moment is that Blacks make up 12% of top managers in the private sector. And this, of course, is far below the level in the public service, but it is consistent with the age and education profile of the Black population, as earlier discussed. The private sector was promised flexibility on targets when the bill was being mooted and being adopted by Parliament, but that flexibility has already been eroded. Firstly, by the Black Economic Empowerment Codes of Good Practice, which many businesses do find themselves under pressure to comply with, and which effectively set targets ranging from 60% Black representation for senior managers to 88% Black representation for junior managers. Then there were a number of important changes in 2013, under which many of the defences on which business had previously been able to rely, such as the size of the pool of suitably skilled people, or economic circumstances in the sector or in the country, were removed from the Act, and the onus was put on business to show that they were making, that it was not in any way their fault, that there was reasonable reasons why they were failing to meet the goal of demographic representativity. And in essence, this exposed business far more to the threat of very big fines, big enough to bankrupt many companies, which is what the government's own impact assessment back in 2010 warned. It said that if you push fines up very high, and at the highest they can be 10% of annual turnover, then there's a very real risk that companies will fail and that employees will then lose their jobs and the overall situation will be worse. In addition, we know that business simply cannot afford a loss of competitiveness. We can see how the public service has lost much of its capacity. Business can't afford the same because it must retain competitiveness, both in relation to other firms within the country, but critically in relation to competitors across the world, because South Africa must be able to sell its products into global markets elsewhere if we're really to prosper and have expanding opportunities for all our people. And if we're to maintain competitiveness, business has to maintain efficiency, and critically, it has no tax revenues on which to fall back if it fails to achieve those two key things. So if we look very briefly at the core provisions of the bill, under Clause 4, we have a new Section 15A of the Act, which will allow the Minister to set numerical targets for designated employers in any national economic sector, with differing targets possible for different levels of employment in different subsectors and in different regions of the country. And the discretion which is given to the Minister here is an entirely untrammeled one. There are no clear guiding parameters, but the Constitutional Court has set its face against this kind of discretion, and it makes for vagueness in laws, and it undermines the supremacy of the rule of law, which is guaranteed by Section 1 of the Constitution. Under the amended Section 53, moreover, business will not be able to obtain a state contract unless it has a certificate of compliance showing that it has complied with the Minister's targets, plus various other obligations, for example, the national minimum wage. But this, unfortunately, is likely also to add to the state's procurement costs, Many businesses may suffer because they can't get state business. They may have to retrench, which could add to unemployment and poverty. But in terms of the state procurement costs, we will also be reducing the pool of entities which can compete for government contracts. And the consequence, unfortunately, could be that the companies which remain have less need to compete on price, that they're more able to inflate prices. And the problem of inflated prices and also a problem of fraud and corruption has become massive in BEE preferential procurement. And we had, for example, the acting chief procurement officer in the National Treasury appearing before the Zondo Commission, one of the very first witnesses to be called in 2018, to say that the relevant rules were not followed in 50% of state contracts, but often something like an emergency was claimed in order to abandon the normal rules. And then, in his words, we would find that a contract price would go from 4 million to 200 million. And this had enormous impact on the state's procurement costs. And the state's budget at that point for procurement was about 800 billion. And unfortunately, the black majority is dependent, as we said, on government goods and services. If there are inflated prices at this level, what it means is the money doesn't go as far as it should. And many black people who need the benefit of goods and services from the state find themselves being shortchanged and having to do with far less than they should receive. Then I'd also believe that the bill, like the Employment Equity Act, which it amends, is unconstitutional. And first of all, because racial classification and racial targets contradict the founding value of non-racialism in Section 1B of the Constitution. And that commitment to non-racialism is not a future aspiration to be met at some point in the future when demographic representativity has supposedly been attained, because that goal, as we've discussed, can actually never be fulfilled. The obligation to embrace non-racialism is a current obligation right now. It's not simply a future aspiration, and it certainly shouldn't be bedeviled by policies which set goals which cannot be fulfilled, and therefore mean that non-racialism in practice is always going to be shifting further and further away. In addition, we have under Section 194 of the Constitution a requirement that the public service should be broadly representative of the population. But that's not the same as the strict demographic representativity envisaged in the Employment Equity Act and in the way that the Act is being interpreted. And in addition, that very same section of the Constitution also makes clear that appointments still have to be based on ability, and fairness must not compromise efficiency, and so on. And the requirement does not apply to the private sector, which means it was not intended to apply to the private sector. There's a Latin maxim here, which I apologize for quoting, but it sums it up well. It says, expressio unius, the expression of the one thing, est or is exclusio ulterius, the exclusion of the other. So if you explicitly mention the one thing, but you don't mention the other thing, it shows that you intended to leave out the other thing. If you expressly mentioned the public service, but you did not mention the private sector, that meant you intended to leave the private sector out of this obligation for broad representativity. And the racial targets, which are really have been developed under the EE Act, also fail the tests laid down by the Constitutional Court in the Van Heerden case back in 2004. There, the Constitutional Court said that authorized remedial measures, which would include EE racial targets of the kind to be decided by the minister under the bill, must pass 3 tests of validity. First, do they target the disadvantaged? And the answer is no, because it's clear that EE racial targets help only about 15% of Black people. In other words, they help the most skilled and or the best politically connected, what India calls the creamy layer. And this is experience which is echoed right around the world, where you have affirmative action measures of a similar kind. It's always the most credentialed who are able to take advantage of these targets, and the great majority of people are unable to do so. They simply are left behind in terms of those targets. Second, do they advance the Black majority? And again, the answer is no, because the racial targets envisaged in this bill will extend the damage that has already been done in the public service to the private sector as well. And that will mean less efficiency, less delivery, fewer jobs, and more poverty. Third, the question laid down by the Constitutional Court: do racial targets promote the achievement of equality? And again, the answer is no. And you can see it very clearly from the Gini coefficient of income inequality, which has risen from 0.59 in 1994 to 0.63 in 2020. And this is very much because employment equity helps the relatively small Black elite, while 9.1 million Black people are now jobless. So you have an ever widening divide between a relatively small group at the top that is able to take advantage of the racial targets and a very large group at the bottom, which has very little chance of ever being appointed to management and other senior posts, but is actually hurt by the targets because they deter investment, they restrict growth, they add to unemployment, and they are undoubtedly part of the reason why 9.1 million Black people are now jobless and destitute. And of course, the Black population makes up 80% of the entire population. So inequality there means inequality widens in the entire society. Another measure too, the bottom 40% of Blacks had roughly the same share of national income in 2015, 3.7%, as they had had in 2006, when it was 3.4%. And this was despite stricter employment equity racial targets in that period, showing again that the racial targets are simply not helping the people at the bottom, who are not going to be eligible for the senior jobs in any event and find their job opportunities constricted every time the economy contracts, every time companies fail, every time companies don't expand and take on more people. So we would argue that the bill is unconstitutional and cannot be adopted in terms of Parliament's obligation to uphold the Constitution at all times. But we would also argue that EE and the wider system of BEE should be replaced by a different form of empowerment, that the Black majority shouldn't simply be left in the status quo, but that a far more effective measures should be found to help bring about rapid upward mobility. And EED, Economic Empowerment for the Disadvantaged, is an IRR proposal which we've been working on for some years, but undoubtedly still needs refinement, which has three key elements. The first one is to recognize and reward the business contribution. We know that business already makes large and important contributions to fixed investment. This is gross fixed capital investment. Some of it comes from state departments, some of it comes from the SOEs, but the great bulk of it, 2/3 of it, comes from the private sector. That business also contributes enormously to employment, providing 70% or so of jobs. That it makes an enormous contribution to tax revenues, both corporate revenue and the PAYE that is gathered from employees. That it really is the fundamental contributor to GDP. That its export earnings are enormously important in helping to finance our imports, boost the value of the rand. And we also know that it's very important that business contributes to research and development. South Africa's spending has fallen down there below global norms. If we could push it up, it would be enormously beneficial. So business should be incentivized by a new sort of scorecard. And they should get EED points, we argue, if they invest more, employ more, pay more in terms of wages, taxes, R&D contributions, and the like. So they're incentivized to expand their contribution to the society and thereby to offer many more opportunities to all South Africans. Secondly, we believe that low-income households should be empowered by tax-funded vouchers for schooling, healthcare, and housing. And these vouchers would empower them directly. Once they are armed with these vouchers, they would have the same kind of choice that the middle class enjoys as to what school they would like to send their children to, as to whether they would like to take out low-cost health insurance, for example, to give them increased access to the private sector, whether they'd like to obtain low-cost medical aid membership, particularly if the government were to make more of that accessible. In terms of housing, instead of having to wait for the government to provide, and the housing list is now longer than it was in 1994, they would be able to start building, buying, upgrading their own homes without having to wait on the public service to do it. And providers, whether public or private, would have to compete for the custom of these households, which would push up quality and hold down costs. That's the great advantage of competition, and the benefits of competition can be made available to poor households as well. And some 700 billion in tax revenues would then be far better spent than it is now. We talked earlier about how poor outcomes often are in education, healthcare, and housing. And instead of the money being badly spent by bureaucrats, it would be well spent by households with a keen personal interest in making sure that they and their families get the most benefit from their tax-funded vouchers. What do ordinary South Africans think about this? In November and December 2020, just at the end of last year, 80% of Black respondents in an IRR opinion poll supported the idea of schooling vouchers. 74% supported healthcare vouchers, 75% supported housing vouchers, and 74% of Black respondents said that these vouchers would be more effective in helping them to get ahead than EE and the broader BEE scheme. The vouchers reach right down to the grassroots, and they are a crucial part of the EED proposal. And business would be incentivized to help here too. They could earn EED points for topping up vouchers for the poorest, perhaps in rural areas in particular, and they could help improve the quality of teaching, help develop innovations in healthcare and housing, all of which would increase the quality that is available to people. And third, we believe that EED, like the social grant system, should use a means test to assess disadvantage. Instead of using race as a proxy for disadvantage, it would cut straight to the heart of the matter. But some 99% of beneficiaries would be Black in any event. Racial classification and racial targets would then fall away, which would be in keeping with the Constitution's commitment to non-racialism. And we would see an upsurge in rapid growth, good schooling, millions more jobs would be created. There would be massive opportunities for all South Africans, and the rising tide of this magnitude would lift all boats. The choice to be made is an important one. The IRR, just as a bit of history, was formed in 1929, so it's almost 100 years ago, to oppose racial discrimination, promote equality before the law, foster racial goodwill, and help liberate the poor. And we know from all the research that we did over decades of apartheid that racial discrimination made upward mobility far more difficult for Black people, because the usual foundations for this, good schooling, adequate housing, skilled employment, property ownership, and business opportunities, were barred to them in whole or part by government policy. Hence, when the Constitution was being framed, the broad agreement that it must prohibit racial discrimination, uphold equality before the law, but also authorize remedial action of an appropriate kind. And the key question is how that remedial action is to be done. And the Employment Equity Act's approach, with its unrealistic and rigid racial targets, has undermined public sector capacity, damaged delivery to the Black majority, deterred investment, restricted growth, added to unemployment, reduced tax revenues, boosted public debt, led to spending cuts and other austerity measures, is part of what is now a pretty bleak picture. The bill, unfortunately, will increase the harm that has already been done. The bill will stall economic recovery, prompt a further flight of scarce skills and capital, leave more people unemployed, add to poverty, and increase inequality between the small Black relative elite that may not benefit at all, of course, if the private sector increasingly departs from the country or businesses close their doors. And rift will increase between the small group at the top and the great majority of Black people who will be further harmed. On the contrary, the country can shift to EED and so promote growth and jobs, empower the poor with tax-funded vouchers for choice and quality, and use a means test in place of racial classification, and so embrace non-racialism right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey. Honorable members, there is the presentation. Questions of clarity. I see there are 2 hands. Any other hand? Any other hand? Any other hand? I see Honorable Mkonto. Any other hand? Any other hand? I will add my hand in the group. Thank you very much. I don't know whether we've lost Honorable Mkonto.
No, I'm here, Chair.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. I also see Honorable Kado's hand is up. Yes. Honorable Kado.
Thank you,
Honorable
Chair.
Kado, Honorable Dana, Honorable Mkondo, in that order. And then I will wait if there is any other hand, then I will come last. Questions of clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Dr. Jeffrey for the presentation. I wonder if Dr. Jeffrey could clarify for us the effect of the new Section 15A that gives the Minister the power to determine sectoral numerical targets, whether she could walk us through what the effect of that new section would be in practice. And I'm particularly interested to know, what is the difference in your view between a numerical target set by the Minister and a quota? You mentioned the Concourt's ruling in the Van Heerden case. We know that the courts have given direction on the recourse to rigid racial quotas, but I want to know, and I want you to clarify for us as a committee, will the implementation of Section 15A as it stands, in effect, make numerical targets set by the Minister quotas? Will numerical targets, in effect, become quotas? Thank you.
Honorable Dana.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Dr. Jeffrey for the presentation. I think it's quite clear and self-explanatory. I'd just like to ask that Dr. Jeffrey please explain to the committee and elaborate on why a means test would be better implemented than racial quotas, if I can state it like that. And then also, may I request that this presentation that she's just delivered to the committee be circulated and sent to us via email. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mkonto.
Thanks, Chair. Given an opportunity, Chair, I would ask a lot of clarity-seeking questions. Unfortunately, time is on our side. But I'll ask maybe 2 or 3 questions. The first one, Chair, is the 1.2 million coordination costs. can Dr. Jeffrey at least give small details of that as to exactly what is she talking about? And then the racial discrimination referred to in the Constitution. What other forms of discrimination, according to her, is this bill trying to redress? Is it only about race, according to her understanding, or are there any other forms of discrimination? And the last one, Chair, will be the way forward. Am I understanding her correctly to say this bill, can it be clarified to me that this bill is only about high positions? It has nothing to do with low level positions, and that in the way forward, how exactly is this going to be done without promoting state dependency syndrome? Thanks, Chair.
Very much, Honorable Mkhonto. Dr. Jeffrey, let me appreciate the presentation that you have made in front of us. Myself also, the issue of time is constraining us because your presentation is thought-provoking. Your presentation has got, it also borders into emotional feelings. And I want to thank you for raising those things. As much of some of them, they are very generic, and it's those that I will touch one or two, in particular around the scales. I would just want to check with who would it not have been better in your presentation, as you have made an introduction, to outline to the public and the committee in particular, that as much as we are aware, majority of us, of the impact of the system of education, that majority of us are a product of, wouldn't be better for you to have just outlined that why you will have majority of Black people who are then not skilled or poorly skilled? Two, am I correct to think that your presentation, as much as you are saying is these amendments are unconstitutional, in fact, it's what the presentation is saying: leave private sector to white people who have got skills on how to run business, focus on public service, public sector, and which is at some point that's what I want to, because that's what I am, that's why I want clarity, is that, is it not in all what you have said, in essence, it's saying the bill, Parliament, the minister, please leave private sector to white people because the constitution is saying ABCD, and in the public sector, majority, it has been done well, and there it's led by Black people. I think the last question is the question that it has been asked by Honorable Mkondo. But again, I would have thought that as race relation, you will really, in your presentation, will it not have been better also to take us through this thing of young people who are jobless? Because in that you have got certain categories. Would it not have been better to really put those categories clearly, because there are those that are graduates, there are those that are from technicons, there are those that are from TVET colleges, and don't you think that it would have been much better and make us to more to because here we the people, we want to deal and have an understanding of your presentation, so that when we deliberate at our own time, we are deliberating being informed with the figures in front of us. So that's why I'm asking the question that would it not have been better if you could have lay bare and put the figures, so that the committee is empowered in its deliberation. I don't see any hand. There was the last hand. I will then request you, Doc, to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could begin with the questions raised by Honourable Cardo. He asked me to elaborate on the effect of Section 15A if it were to be implemented as it is now in the bill, and specifically asked if it would turn targets into quotas. I think that's always a difficult thing to know. The distinction between the two in practice is hard to draw. And I think it's also not the most important concern. What the most important concern is the level of rigidity that will nevertheless be introduced, whether one characterizes what the minister requires of business as the fulfillment of a target or a quota. And it will be primarily directed to business, simply because the public service and SOEs, municipalities, provincial departments have generally moved very far towards the EEP goal of 79%, whereas the figures that I gave you of the private sector show that it hasn't done so. But what the private sector has done, as I also pointed out, is more in keeping with the age and the skills profile of the population. And what we need to make sure is that in trying to provide redress, we don't cause harm to the wider society. And I fear that we have caused harm through the insistence on unrealistic racial targets, the pursuit of demographic representativity, which cannot be attained, has not been attained in any country. And as we try and pursue this impossible goal, we've actually done damage to the capacity of the public sector. And that in turn has caused damage to the great majority of Black South Africans who do need efficient schooling, healthcare, housing, and so on to be available, particularly so that they and their children have a greater opportunity to climb the economic ladder. So having seen the kind of damage that has arisen in the public sector, and many people have acknowledged that it's the skills shortage that's been a key factor, the appointment of people without the requisite experience, we shouldn't be doing the same thing, extending it to the private sector, because our economy is in a great deal of trouble. But even if it weren't in a great deal of trouble, even if we had some magical amount of growth, 5% or so, it would still be wrong in principle to be requiring business to do things which don't make sense from the point of view of either themselves or the wider society. What we really need is an organic process where we get the excellent schooling in place, which we can do with the help of the school vouchers, where we get a rapidly growing economy, where we get very many more jobs being provided. And the Bureau of Economic Research just shows us what could be attained if we were to match the growth rates in other emerging markets. And in this way, we would generate the rising tide that lifts all boats. Instead of seeing jobs as some kind of finite quantity, which can either go to black or to white, and you argue about how that should be done, we should be seeing the enormous capacity that this country has to expand jobs for everybody. And then with better skills, with more experience, over time, of course, there will be a move ever closer and closer to Black people being in the predominant role in all tiers of employment. But this would happen without the kind of intervention which at the moment has caused great damage in the public service and has the potential to cause great damage in the private one. And perhaps just to be more specific, if business finds itself obliged to appoint on a basis that does not take adequate account of skills and experience, then business is going to be extremely reluctant to expand at all. They can't obviously easily dismiss people who are already in their employment, particularly if it's on racial grounds, in order to make room for people of a different color. But they will be very reluctant to expand. And there's also a chance that, given all the other problems in our country, that we will see an increasing outflow of skills and of capital. Already there are many fewer businesses than there were before, partly COVID lockdown, of course, but also because of this economic malaise that has plagued us for so many years. So we risk business closing doors, jobs being lost, let alone the expansion of the new jobs that we so badly need. Then secondly, I was asked why a means test rather than a racial test. I suppose there are two main reasons. As I said, if you apply a means test, you're looking straight to the heart of the problem. You're identifying people who are disadvantaged in terms of their means. If you apply a racial test, then what you're also doing is making it much easier for the relative elite to benefit. And so this is, again, what has happened in every country around the world. That expression that I quoted from India, that it's the creamy layer that draws a benefit, is effectively what happens wherever affirmative action on a racial or ethnic basis is applied. Because the people with the best political connections or the best skills, who are the most credentialed, as I said, are the ones who are most able to take advantage of the opportunities. And the truly disadvantaged, the people who are unskilled, perhaps never even got a matric, are living in informal settlements, simply have no opportunity to get into those senior jobs, which are, of course, the jobs that are in most demand. So if you apply a means test, you cut to the heart of the matter. You identify the people who are disadvantaged and most in need of a leg up. And secondly, because of our history, because of our commitment in the Constitution to non-racialism, it's a very good thing to move away from racial classification. The National Party finally repealed the Population Registration Act in 1991, and with it those categories, African-coloured, Indian, white. But in a way, we've breathed new life into those categories through laws like the Employment Equity Act, which do require now supposedly voluntary self-classification, but still get people to consider themselves in terms of their racial category rather than as just South Africans, as I think Monsieur Lakota said in 2004 it would be good if we could do. So it's embraced non-racialism and it's cut to the heart of who needs help by applying a means test. And then Honourable Mkonto raised the point about what are the coordination costs likely to cost 1.2 million. I'm afraid I have no particular insight on that. It's a figure that I picked up from the memorandum on the objects of the bill. The indication, as I recall, is that before a compliance certificate could be issued, the Department of Employment and Labour would have to coordinate with other entities to make sure, for example, that employers had complied with minimum national wages, that they had complied with the unfair discrimination provisions in the employment equity legislation. And so that increased coordination requirement would presumably require more staff, more interaction, and there would be certain compliance costs estimated at 1.2 million. In What other forms of discrimination is the bill intended to redress? Well, obviously, employment equity legislation deals also with gender and with disability. But the key issue really is, I've focused on race because given our history, that is where the greatest need for has been, arguably. But apart from categories of disadvantage, what is really important is that people who are poor, who are destitute, should have the opportunity for upward mobility. And that seems to me that we can achieve through the kinds of alternative mechanism that I'm looking at. Economic empowerment for the disadvantaged would embrace people of all races, people of all genders, people who are differently abled as well as able, etc. And what you would be trying to do is to find the people who are in need and then to empower them with vouchers so that they have choices on education, on healthcare, and housing, and can immediately begin to see a considerable improvement in really all the factors that are needed for upward mobility. And secondly, if you have a big focus on the role of business, which is the most important employer, which contributes the tax revenues that government needs, that is the factor behind GDP growth. If we get business contributing and growing, then we will have more jobs as well and more opportunities for people to rise up the economic ladder. Then, I'm not sure if I understood that. Something about dependency. Would we be increasing dependency? And I'm not quite sure what the context there, perhaps from the bill itself, one would be decreasing dependency on the government. I quoted the statement by Mr. Montashe indicating that really Black South Africans should be seeing themselves as dependent on the Employment Equity Act and other measures that the government introduces. But of course, Black South Africans have been really responsible in large measure for their own upliftment for decades. We had what my former colleague John Ken Berman called a silent revolution long before 1994, in terms of which Black consumer power, Black labor power became enormously important. And Black people were, as I said, moving, as they should have been, into managerial supervisory positions and so on, beginning to earn far more, beginning to have a much bigger role in the society. This wasn't something that just began with the ANC or the Employment Equity Bill. So it's not a good thing to encourage dependency on the government when people have the capacity to help themselves with appropriate help from the state. And the voucher system that we're sketching is very much a way of breaking the cycle of dependency. If you empower people with tax-funded vouchers, give them their own choices, turn them into customers that business and others want to cater for, this is enormously empowering, and it will break the cycle of dependency. And in terms of Madam Chair, I'm sorry about the time now. You asked whether it wouldn't have been better to talk about the skills shortage in the country, where it comes from. Of course, it has much to do with our history. And I think given the shortage of time, perhaps the best, if I may, is that the IRR does have a great deal of information on the education sphere. One of the critical things that we see, unfortunately, so many years after 1994, is that of the 1.1, 1.2 million children that start in grade 1 at the beginning of the cycle, by the time you get to grade 12, 40% or so of them have dropped out. We have probably an overall pass rate, if you take account of those who've dropped out, of only about 40%. And the real tragedy is that when it comes to the proportion of people who are able to obtain a 50% pass rate in maths, it's a mere 4% of those 1.1, 1.2 million that started in school. And that's what we critically need to change, so that all South Africans have much better opportunities to rise up the ladder. Then I think the question about why am I concerned just about the private sector? Do I want the private sector just to be able to keep its skilled whites? Well, I think to force the private sector into a situation echoing that of the public service, where capacity has declined, efficiency has declined, would be enormously unfortunate for the entire country and all its people. And as I said, the bill is likely to have its main focus on the private sector rather than the public one, because in the public service, we have almost the attainment of the 79% goal. but at a considerable cost to efficiency and to the country as a whole. And we should have started also with perhaps with the extent of joblessness. Sorry, in a presentation, it's always difficult to know how much time you have for different things. But certainly the problem of joblessness is an enormous one, and it's been growing since 1994, both in terms of the numbers involved and in terms of the employment rates. And it particularly afflicts, of course, unskilled Black people, those who've dropped out of school without obtaining a matric. And very often it's also is a problem, even for people at the TVET colleges who don't seem to receive a very good quality of training. In terms of university graduates, it's very clear that unemployment within that group is much smaller. But we also, unfortunately, have a considerable dropping off out of university, where many of the people who are admitted find themselves unable to graduate, which is heartbreaking for them, their families, and incredibly difficult for the country as a whole. But again, with your permission, I would be glad to send further information on education to the committee, together with my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey. Honorable Mkondo, is it a new hand or is it the hand that you...
No, it's the old one, Chair. I'm sorry for that.
Please lower it. I think, honorable members, if there are no other questions, it is fine, because we really asking these questions so that when we deliberate, we are able to, you don't then, as the presenter said, listening to the deliberations, said, but I was never asked. Should I have been given an opportunity, I would have then responded to that. It's quite an interesting time and process for the committee, not only for the committee, but I think for the country. We want to thank you for coming and deliberate. If the committee is agreeing that the breakdown on the issues that I reflected, I asked if it would have not been much easier to make work much easier if we do have that breakdown. I think the committee will be in agreement with that. If you can submit those, if possible, by the end of tomorrow, if you can, or by the end of the week, because remember that after all this, we are then going to deliberate. We don't want to be deliberating without having an informed situation. In terms of the dependency, if I understood Honorable Mkondo, it's in terms of your way forward. If he was asking the issue of the vouchers, because myself, I've been struggling, trying to phrase a question which was more in line with what you are proposing should be done in terms of vouchers to families for education. Is it not a grant, a more sophisticated way of giving Black poor people a grant again, which may then, in terms of the question asked by Honorable Mkondo, that are we not creating a dependency syndrome for the state again? So I think it was in that context, it was more of your way forward. I'm not quite sure whether you would want to, with that clarity, you would want to respond to that question that I have now clarified. I didn't ask permission from her. I thought it's my responsibility as the chair. If maybe you have just missed that, to just check if I hope Honorable Mkondo, I'm in line with what you were trying to do. You want to respond to that?
If I may, Madam Chair, and if Honourable Mkondo is happy.
Yes, Honorable Mkondo, are you fine with that?
Chair, no, I'm not. You are correct, Chair. My question was based on what he presented as a way forward. So the response did not address that. The response was a bit general, but I was referring specifically to the points she presented as a way forward. Thanks, Chair.
Yes.
May I respond then, Madam Chair?
Yes, Doctor.
Thank you. The way we see the vouchers working at the moment, there's something like 700 billion that goes in the budget to education and to healthcare and to community development and housing. And we recognize that the government cannot expand its spending because we are already in a situation where we have very high public debt. It would also be very good if we could get the growth. That means we don't have to embark on austerity, but we could reallocate some of the money that we are already allocating to these core needs. And so low-income households and families would receive these vouchers, which would be exchangeable solely for these core needs, education and housing and healthcare. And as I said, there would be both public and private entities that would then obviously see those families as consumers, as customers, who would want to compete for their custom by holding their prices down, keeping their quality up, making sure that they meet the needs of their customers. And that in itself would be an enormously empowering thing for low-income families. And it would be a reallocation of the budget, not an increased social grant. And the hope would very much be is that it would diminish, the need for it would diminish over time. At the moment, we're in a situation where we have very high unemployment, where we have very low growth, and where we have a very poor quality, unfortunately, often of education, housing, healthcare, and so on. But now, these housing, healthcare, and education needs were being met far better. Jobs would be expanding, growth would be taking off, and the number of people who would be poor on the means test would diminish year by year. So there would be a phasing out as these vouchers helped bring about an upliftment for the Black majority. But it would be effectively all people. One doesn't have to single out the Black majority. But given our history, one is particularly concerned that people who were so badly treated in the past should have the chance to get ahead. But they would have the chance to get ahead under the system. And that is why we urge that this should be the approach, rather than the one which has taken us via the Employment Equity Act, and of course many other policy choices, to a situation where there's a feeling really of hopelessness in the country, and so many people are unemployed. Quality of education, healthcare, and so on is low. We can address all these things, and we can in time phase out those vouchers as people have the money to meet their own needs.
And just the last question from me. Voucher, which one will be much more better and empowering? A voucher vis-a-vis the role of private sector in skilling and reskilling of their people for them to go up the ladder of the economy. Voucher versus skilling, reskilling by private sector, because let me make an example why I'm asking that question. A worker is working in VW. VW is producing cars. But are those workers, because at a particular time, those workers are going to either retire, or will it not be better for the private sector, for its responsibility, to ensure that when they leave VW, they are able to build to generate parts. When mine workers leave the mining sector, they have been empowered on how to clean or to cut. So a diamond or gold, I'm talking about a voucher. What will be your view, your voucher vis-a-vis skilling and reskilling?
I think that that would really fall into the first part of our overall program. You know, when we say EED should also increase the role of business, that they should be contributing more, that they should get EED points for investment, for expansion, for offering more jobs. One of the things that we've often have talked about is training, that where business trains employees, again, there should be EED points available for that. But we must also, when it comes to the vouchers, we're looking at the much bigger picture. We're looking at the children growing up. We're looking at people with healthcare problems now. We're looking at people living in informal settlements, the great majority of whom do not have jobs and don't have the opportunity for that on-the-job training. So the vouchers would be geared at meeting the needs of those people and making it easier for them to have the skills and the foundation needed for upward mobility. And at the same time, the emphasis on the first prong, as it were, on business expanding would also mean that they would have more opportunities for employment and for being able to earn their own income. And that critically is the overall picture that we would like to generate. And we do think that on the voucher element, business could also contribute in various ways, topping up vouchers for people in rural areas, as I said, or helping to, through innovation, to develop new ways of the various kinds of different houses that could be put up more cost effectively, bigger houses for less money.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey. It was quite interesting, thought-provoking, mind-boggling, emotive, but it's fine. That's why we are called public representatives. Can we then, thank you very much, ma'am. Can we then, yeah, thank you. Can we then have the next presenter, Mr. Sakaza?
Yes, Chair. The next presenter is supposed to be now Commission for Gender Equality, CGE, and Mr. Dennis Matotoka is on board, so you can give over to him, Chair.
Why are you saying it's supposed to be as if they are not here?
No,
Commission for Gender Equality?
Yes, Chair.
Can we, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for the opportunity. Good morning, I think it's still morning. So members of the committee, Madam Chair, I'm not alone. I have my commissioners here with me. I just wanted to acknowledge them. Chair, we are the Commission for Gender Equality. We are a Chapter 9 institution that is established in terms of Section 187 of the Constitution. We have a mandate to monitor and evaluate legislation, policies, and practices of the state, statutory bodies, and private businesses, as well as indigenous and customary laws. And we conduct research and make recommendations to Parliament. And we receive complaints, we investigate such complaints on gender discrimination, and we conduct public awareness and education on gender equality. It is from this premise, Madam Chair, that we make inputs to the Employment Equity Amendment Bill. And we would again want to express our appreciation for this opportunity for us to present our views and our submissions to this bill. Madam Chair, as a Chapter 9 institution, we had what we call transformation hearings. We conducted these transformation hearings dating back to 2013. Now, the transformation hearings were focusing specifically both in the public and the private sector to ensure that there is accountability in terms of implementing the Employment Equity Act. Now, the purpose again was to identify challenges that both the sectors encounter in terms of implementing the Employment Equity Act, and also to assess the impact of the Act in the workplace, and also to assess the challenges or barriers that women and persons with disabilities experience in terms of moving from administrative positions to other occupational levels. Now, we have been having these hearings up until from 2013 until recently, and now we are currently doing follow-up hearings to assess the extent to which the entities are able to implement some of the recommendations that the Commission has made during the hearings. Madam Chair, in those hearings, we have accounting officers that are subpoenaed by the organization, by us as the CGE. Commissioners will pose specific questions that will really assess the extent in which entities are demonstrating commitment of implementing the Employment Equity Act to ensure that there is rather equitable representation in various occupational levels in the workplace. Now, what we were able to assess, Chair, was there were a number of issues that clearly demonstrated challenges of implementing the Employment Equity Act, which in our view was more detrimental to women and persons with disability. Hence, from our submission was that the focus of the bill should not only be confined to race focus, but should also look at the gender dynamics that are existing in the workplace. For example, Chair, we found as the Gender Commission that most workplaces, both private and public, they do not provide breastfeeding facilities to women in the workplace. They do not provide flexi time for pregnant employees in the workplace. And we know that these are some of the barriers that limit women's effective participation in the workplace. And there's also the stereotype views that when you employ women at a managerial level or at a particular decision-making level, they will not be able to perform because these are people who still have to look after their children and so forth. And our view as the Commission was that to ensure that such barriers are addressed, the employers, both public and the private, needs to create an enabling environment where women would be able to perform their duties effectively without a worry that they have to go to a crèche or they have to go take maternity leave, or even after maternity leave, they still ask for a number of months so that they can bond with their children. It's from that premise, Madam Chair, that we have recommended that there must be breastfeeding facilities in the workplace. There should be flexi time if they are not able to provide breastfeeding facilities. We've also assessed the policies that aims to ensure there is a progression of women and persons with disabilities in various occupational levels. And we found those policies to be gender blind, and it brought into question the commitment by both sectors to ensure that women, persons with disabilities are catered for, or they are adequately and equitably represented in the various occupational levels. So their policies are gender blind, and our view is that the reason why their policies are gender blind is because we don't have a guiding yardstick, rather, or an empowering provision that pushes the sectors to prioritize the appointment, the recruitment of persons with disabilities and women in various occupational levels. And we found that to be a gap that the sectors are unable to implement because of a lack of a legislation, rather, or provision in the Employment Equity Act that makes it mandatory for the sectors to implement that. And Chair, one of the things that we must appreciate about the Act is that it essentially says to the employers they must come up with innovative measures to ensure that there is equitable representation of persons, or various persons from previously disadvantaged groups. It provides this discretion for employers to set their own targets. And we have to bring into the question whether, since 1998, up until now, was the discretion that is provided to employers able to ensure that the previously disadvantaged groups benefit from this empowering provision. And as the Gender Commission, we were able to find that there were areas of improvement, but to have or to ensure that there is equitable representation, we found that it is still a problem. And that finding, Madam Chair, is also supported by the various reports from the Employment Equity Commission. The reports from the Employment Equity Commission year in, year out clearly outline one important factor that it should be of a concern and aim to be addressed by this bill. And that factor is especially in the private sector, there is a finding or rather an expression by the Employment Equity Commission that the white groups in particular, they enjoy preferential treatment in terms of skill and promotional opportunities. And with that, it definitely demonstrates some of the challenges why, for example, Black women will not be able to acquire certain positions because of the lack of skills that maybe they may be lacking in whatever portfolio or unit that they are occupying. So the preferential treatment that other races enjoy in the workplace also talks a lot about the prospects or the lack of prospects that previously disadvantaged groups encounter in the workplace. So it is that flexibility, Madam Chair, that we found that it is still a problem in the private sector and also in the public sector. We found as the Commission that employment equity managers are appointed in the private sector. Some they do, some they don't. But in instances where employment equity managers are appointed and they recognize the lack of representations or the inadequate representation of previously disadvantaged groups, they do not have powers. They cannot even persuade managers or senior managers or owners of the company to take robust measures to ensure that there is equitable representation in various occupational levels, because it's not an agency in our assessment when we engage the private sector and the public sector. So those are the gaps that we have found. And one important aspect also is that, Madam Chair, when the complainants, or rather the complaints that we normally receive, when somebody says, I've been discriminated against on the basis of gender when it comes to a particular occupational level, when I was applied and I believe that I've been excluded on the basis that I'm a female, we must appreciate that in South Africa, litigation is very expensive. So it is not every female employee or a person with disability in the workplace will be able to challenge some of the decisions that are taken by the employers, both in the public or private sector, will not be able to afford litigation each time when they are excluded in terms of promotions or in terms of benefits, training. It's not everyone. So litigation becomes a problem. And that is why we have found as the Commission that previously disadvantaged groups, and also said by the Employment Commission, they continue to be over-concentrated at administrative levels, but their upward mobility continues to be a challenge. With your permission, Chair, I may also share the important case that highlighted the systemic discrimination and inequalities that that the Commission is referring to. In 2018, Chair, we had a very interesting case where a complainant, Ms. Cowan, I think it was also in the media, but the complainant was a suitably qualified candidate. And when I say suitably qualified, I mean both in terms of skills and in terms of academic qualifications. Applied to a private sector entity, and she was promised to be appointed as a CFO, which we know that is a very critical position and a decision-making level. She was appointed at as a group financial manager, and she was asked to give herself time to be subjected to processes, training, exposure within the company up until they feel that she's now ready to take over the position of a CFO. And the CFO position, when it was vacant, it was allocated to somebody who did not even have the requirements to take over the position. To cut the story, or rather the case short, was that ultimately the entity said to the female candidate that you are a female and you are an employment equity candidate, and if you want to leave, you can leave. And this emanates because she was now demonstrating her frustrations, both in terms of her relationship in the workplace, but also understanding that she was appointed with the anticipation that in future she will be a CFO of the company. Obviously, that led to her not taking that position. She was able to institute action, and she was compensated accordingly. So she raised issues around race discrimination and gender discrimination. So, Madam Chair, is not everyone, and not every female or person with disability would be able to take such measures to ensure that there is redress in terms of their exclusion or the systemic discrimination that exists in the workplace. So we are of the view that there should be measures that are now put in place to ensure that we don't expect everyone to be going for litigation, but there should be empowering provisions that will ensure that the systemic discriminations and inequalities that exist both in the public and the private sector are addressed. And we believe that the starting point is this Employment Equity Amendment Bill, which really we find that it is progressive in terms of addressing some of these exclusions that women and persons with disability experience in the workplace, particularly in the private sector. Now, there are very positive provisions in the bill. We welcome the national minimum wage that is proposed in Section 1 of the amendment, and we also note, Madam Chair, the proposal to have a comprehensive definition of persons with disability. We find this definition to be comprehensive, and it covers a variety of disabilities. And we found this to be a gap in our investigative hearings, where most employees were reluctant, or there was a disinclination to present, or rather to disclose some of their the disabilities in the workplace. So to recognize all forms of disabilities and to have a comprehensive definition, we believe as the Commission that it could also assist the employers and even the employees to feel comfortable enough to disclose their disabilities in the workplace. There's also the issue of the sectorial targets. As the Commission, we support the inclusion of sectorial targets, and we believe that it will proliferate the representation of previously disadvantaged groups in various occupational levels. Primarily because, Chair, from 1998 to date, the employers have been given an opportunity to implement or set their own targets to ensure that previously disadvantaged groups are adequately represented in various positions. But as it is now, we know that that is not happening. So we need to have a measure that will ensure that the private sector particularly is persuaded and pushed to ensure that targets are really met to ensure that women and persons with disabilities enjoy the fruits that were envisaged by the drafters of the Employment Equity Act, and that is to ensure that there is equitable representation in various occupational levels. We also note the amendment of Section 20 of the Act, and we welcome the proposed amendment to the extent that it will provide employers with specific targets that need to be achieved. The current format, as I've indicated, it permits employers to have their discretion to set their own targets, and we are not getting anywhere. Even when they come before the Commission, we ask them about the poor representation of black women in top management positions. We are all told the same explanation, that they are not there or we don't have positions. But what is very interesting is that when you have acting positions where women can be prioritized and get the necessary managerial experience, you still find women being excluded in those acting positions and men being prioritized in those. And that is done despite their academic qualifications. So we find that that system itself, it demonstrates the level of commitment by entities or employers to achieve the aspirations of the Employment Equity Act. We also note, Chair, that there is a deletion of paragraph B, which classified employers with fewer than 50 employees who meet the annual turnover of, that is highlighted in Schedule 4 of the Employment Equity Act. It is noted that this is indeed a reducing regulatory burden on small businesses rather in relation to the regulatory provisions. The implication of this is that employers will not be obliged, obviously, those who are no longer designated employers will not be obliged to meet sectorial targets. And we have reservations around this to the extent that previously disadvantaged groups of such employers may continue to be underrepresented in various occupational levels, and preferential treatment still be enjoyed by white groups, particularly in the private sector. This will therefore, in our view, reverse the minimal gains and progress that has been made to include previously disadvantaged groups in various occupational levels. To this end, we recommend that the employers with fewer than 50 employees who meet the turnover threshold determined in Schedule 4 of the EEA should be retained as designated employees. We also welcome the operation of, or rather the introduction and operation of Section 53 of the Act, which provides that state contracts may be used to ensure that termination of such relationships are made to ensure that private sector do not benefit from state contracts. It may raise, obviously, Chair, views that this will not benefit the economy, this will not promote business, but we must look at it also from a perspective that this has been an ongoing process, where now clearly there are systemic discrimination practices that are promoted by the employers, and therefore there needs to be a compelling measure that will ensure that there is clear commitment to demonstrate commitment to achieve the aspiration of the Employment Equity Act. In conclusion, Chair, the Commission supports the bill in as far as it includes sectorial targets for the purposes of ensuring equitable representation of suitably qualified persons from designated groups at all occupational level. We believe that with an existing legislation that sets a target, both the Employment Equity Commission and the Commission will also progressively realize the increase of representation of suitably qualified individuals in occupational levels in both the public and the private sector. Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matotoka. Safe to say that you didn't introduce your colleagues. You did mention that you have got your commissioners with you, but we don't know them. You haven't told us who are they. Will you do that, please?
Pardon me, Chair.
I'm asking because they maybe in the responding to questions, you would like them to come in, but who are they? I think it's important for record purposes to have them.
Thank you so much, Chair, and my sincere apologies. I have with me the Chairperson of the Commission, Chairperson Tamara Matebula. I've also known.
Let me see her face. Is it possible? Particularly the chair. Is it possible? If it's not possible, fine.
Yes, I'm sure I'll just find out from her. And I'm also having my Deputy Chair of the Commission, Dr. Moleko, and I see her picture. She's here. I'm not sure she's able to show her face. And
thank you, Dennis. I'm here. Thank you, Honorable Dundra. I'm here. Thank you.
Woohoo, flowers. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I also have Commissioner Day with the delegation today. I'm not sure if she's able to show her face.
No, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable members, there is the presentation from the Commission for Gender Equality. Any questions of clarity from honorable members? I see Honorable Mkondo's hand. Any other hand? Okay, and then it will be my hand after Honorable Mkondo. All right, Honorable Mkondo. Honorable Mkondo, over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Greetings to Mr. Matotoka and his team. Chair, I have only one question. The matter that he is raising of equality in terms of gender and disability, I just want to check as to, I just need clarity as to, are they, do they pay more focus on the matter of persons being adequately and relevantly qualified before they push for employment equity? What is that they are doing to ensure that those women and those people with disabilities are adequately qualified, adequately and relevantly qualified? Thanks, Chair, because it mustn't be a matter of compliance. It must be a matter that they must add, those women must add value to whatever position that they are promoted to. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Mkondo. From my side, just two clarities. One is that in you interacting with companies, have you picked up, or has it been exposed to you that there are females that are paid less than males in workplaces? Secondly, is that would it not be, remember that we are engaged in a bill, in the amendment, and in that there are areas where we cannot just be general. Is it not going to be important for you to inform us of those companies where you have identified an example that you have made of a person who was then told that you are an equity, whatever, with which companies that? I'm raising that because, and maybe we will be advised by the legal section, because it's important. For my question is based on the fact that we are to know, when we are amending a law, we must not just amend a law by being general. We must have facts in front of us so that we are then able to apply our minds and in relation to these amendments. I thought I will ask, I must ask that if maybe it's a bit problematic, maybe even from our side, we will then consult with our legal fundis to advise us in because there are sectors that we know that are more white, and unfortunately some of them are female dominated, and a sector of that nature which I'm aware of, it's a sector of which that deals with cosmetology. That sector is a white female dominated, with females that are employed, but females that are at I mean, all of us know we go and do our massage, our pedicures and whatever. So I'm just making an example about that, and us having to say it's company X. We will, don't you think that it's important for us to raise those? Yeah. I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I do welcome the questions. The first question from Honorable Mkondo was whether we are considering whether the suitably qualified criteria when we talk about the advancement of women or persons with disabilities in various occupational levels. My response from the Commission side is that is absolutely what we consider. We are not saying persons because of their gender. irrespective of their skills, irrespective of their qualifications, ought to be appointed in decision-making positions. That is not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that there are those who are suitably qualified, having the necessary skills, having the necessary qualifications, but they are excluded, where men are prioritized in terms of upward mobility. And I'm giving an example, Madam Chair, that we even have it from the Employment Equity Commission's reports for years that recognizes that white groups enjoy preferential treatment when it comes to skills training. So if there are limitations experienced by, for example, Black African women to assume a particular managerial levels, but there are skills programs that are there, they also ought to be prioritized for those in the same way that white groups are prioritized. And that is basically what we are saying, that there should be a clear intention. There must be an intentional commitment that we want to achieve equity in the workplace. And by so doing, we are going to put specific measures, not only for white groups, but for previously disadvantaged groups. And I think it's important that we allow women to demonstrate their competency, to demonstrate their skills, and be afforded a fair opportunity, the same way that white males in the private sector enjoy. But we are saying the women equally so should be afforded a fair opportunity and demonstrate their leadership skills in various positions. There's a lot of literature around, or rather debate, whether male leadership supersedes those of female leadership. We are not into that space. We are simply saying that the current situation in South Africa now is that there is a clear inadequate representation at top management level, senior management level, and various occupational levels. And the reason is not because of the lack of commitment or lack of, or rather the lack of qualifications. There are qualifications where despite those, the candidates are overlooked for that. Madam Chair, you've asked me about the specifics in terms of whether the name of the company. The name of the company I was referring to is called Associated Motor Holdings. This is where Ms. Cowan took the case to court in 2018, where she was referred to as a female employment equity candidate. So the name of the company is Associated Motor Holdings. Madam Chair, we as the Commission, we are currently zooming into the mines. There is a mine also called Palabora Mining Company, where we are getting various complaints from female employees, where they allege gender discrimination, or rather gender wage gap, in terms of employees that are appointed in the same position, performing the same duties, and occupying the positions of the same value, basically. So we cannot, as the Commission, say that there is no gender wage gap in the workplace until we've ascertained so. So we continue to receive such complaints. And as I'm saying, with Palabora Mining Company, it's a visit that we're actually going to be doing this month to go and retrieve the record and do the necessary comparison to see to the extent which women are prejudiced because of their gender in the workplace. I thank you, Chair.
Yes, I see the hand of the Deputy Chair, Dr. Molikwa. Do you also want to
Yes,
input?
please. Thank you, Honorable Dundra. Greetings, colleagues. Can I just ask the organizer if they can just allow me to share slide? I just want to show Honorable Mkondo, just to respond to Honorable Mkondo before I respond to Honorable, in addition to what Mr. Matotobo has already issued. If you can just allow me to just share my screen briefly. I just want to share a slide that is analysis that has been done. If the Portfolio Committee IT would just enable me to share the slide quickly on the screen.
Will Mr. Sakasa, will Dr. Molikwa be able to do that?
While he's doing that, can I then just answer your question, Honorable Dundra? Because I know maybe he's just allowing the hosting on the side of the can we provide evidence further? I think the critical thing that I picked up on the South African situation, a lot of research has been done on this issue of this gender pay gap. Is it real? Is it something that we are purporting and it's not there? Is there, I think, data that actually provides substantiation on this issue? And you're finding that there is data. The slide that I was going to show also to Honorable Mkondo, which shows you, okay, here it is. Thank you. I can share now. Let me just quickly share it with everyone. Here it is. It's just this one slide. This is a slide that Stats SA has released on the level of education vis-a-vis the level of earnings by gender. I want to take you to the first, I just want you to understand the slide. So this is independent analysis by Stats SA comparing across education level, all education level, the level of income that individuals in South Africa are earning based on their level of education. Let's just look at the different level. You see here that there's no education, both female and male. This is how much they're earning. This is the primary school education, both female and male have that level. This is how much they're earning. And so you see with high tertiary institution, and then this is the average of all, including across all education level, they have the average here. So what Stats SA has found is on average, first and foremost, when none of us have education, despite the gender, you find that females are earning, this is the monthly earning by gender, they're earning 2,102 versus men who are earning 3,903. This is, all of them have no education. This is the reality of the gender wage gap. So irrespective of the level of education that you have in this country, if you are female, you may all have no education, but you're earning almost half of what the school. Primary level, you see here that the 2,286 is earned by the female, vis-a-vis the male, almost doubling at 4,099 if they have a high level of education. The disparity is shown by these bar graphs here. You go to high level of education, high school level. You go to the tertiary. What is surprising is that even when you have more level of schooling, there's a slight gap, this gap education in South Africa, which is quite disturbing. So you see that the female earns 17,410 a month, the man earns 27,607. This is the monthly earnings as measured by Stats SA. And you must remember these are average earnings based on the survey that they've collected. Then on average, females earn on average 70% of their male counterparts, as you can see on average. Now this means you've aggregated all of these variables. So I just wanted to show that for the house. So the no education, the gap is wide at 55% of what males are earning. The second thing I just want, which is proving statistically with data that indeed there is a gender wage gap, irrespective of education. You may have no education. Higher you go for education, you're seeing that there's an existence of a gender wage gap from Statistics SA. So this is independent data that's analyzed. Then I think the second thing, Honorable Dundro, I just want to point out, we've got very progressive laws that South Africa has enacted over the last couple of years. I think that we have noted as CGE that we have seen the employment equity, in fact, we've got various laws, Employment Equity Act, the Bill of Rights, and the King for Corporate Governance that requires that we don't discriminate and there is equality irrespective of gender. Now, though the national conventions are there, the international declarations are there, but I think it's the practice in South Africa where you're finding that irrespective of education and experience, which is what Honorable Mkondo was asking, and the nature and the context of the work, we're finding that analysis is showing that there's actually statistical finding that shows that there is a gender pay gap. I think the structural inequalities point to us trying to understand what could the causes be, and I think this is where the Act probably needs to look at. So is it exactly what you're saying about the industry and the sector, about the job type, the more senior people are, the lack of union representation and the abuse of workers that may be at the hand when there's non-union representation? Do we find that there's a worsening of this? And you're finding that all of these issues, they do make a difference with respect to pay gap. If there's bargaining councils, if there's ability to have union representativity, if there's ability to have a voice and to be heard, this does affect, even the level of work does affect the outcome in terms of the issue of the pay gap. So it's a very complicated thing. There's various studies and research that have been done looking at the outcomes of this. But I think the focus on us is one of the things we should probably consider in dealing with the pay gap is how do we develop not just the critical skills, as Dennis has emphasized, but also how do we deal with the severity of lack of transparency? How do we make sure that we improve transparency in organizations so that if indeed companies are saying, despite your equality in education, we will still pay you the same, irrespective of gender. You may find that in a company, individuals, employees are finding that because of the privacy, information is not shared. You may find that same employees, same level, and you're finding some employees are getting paid 2 to 3 times higher or a certain percentage higher than their counterpart simply because of the race or the gender or combination of both. And that is an issue that needs to be dealt with from a level of transparency. I think that's an act and an issue that requires us to look at the openness and the ability to access information, and employers making sure that employees can access such information to the level that it's not detrimental to both parties. I also think that companies must publish such information. It should be public information. It shouldn't be hidden, whereby the structure of the acts and the laws in South Africa enable, to a large degree, information to not be public. And if information is not transparent, it enables this type of information. I think the third is that audits of this type of behavior, where we do audits, and I think CGE could have a role to play, despite our limited budget, where we partner with the Department of Labor, where audits are done to look at, is there indeed equal pay given equal level of work experience and equal level of education, particularly in sectors which are predominantly finding such problems. So I think that you are correct to say we've got to have evidence-based assertion that we make. I do believe that there are some sectors where some research has been done where it's incrementally a problem, particularly male-dominated sectors, industrial sectors, STEM-related sectors, where you're finding science, technology, engineering, construction, where these gaps persist much more so than in services sectors. And there's reasons for that because of factual or what we call determinants in those subsectors that drive these higher. So I'm just pointing to some of these, and I think it will help us in terms of dealing with the amendments that we need to probably make to look at issues of transparency, to look at issues of public audits and making information publicly available regularly, and making sure that these are done by the Department of Labor, and making sure that it's a norm and it's not done as something that is out of the ordinary. Thank you, Chair. I think those are my points for now.
No, thank you, Dr. Mluka. Unfortunately, the media section of Parliament has complained that your video was off, so they couldn't see you. I see there's somebody's hand by the name of Tamara. Is that part of the committee? Is that person part of the commissioners, Mr.?
Yes, Chair. That is the chair of the commission, Tamara Matebuli.
Will she then be able to? We must see her face. Ms. Chairperson of the CGE, over to you. And can you please switch on your video? Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair of the Portfolio Committee, and greetings to members of the Portfolio Committee and the public at large. Chairperson, you asked okay. Yes, there we go. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity and invite to come and present. Your last question, Chair, which was question number 3, where you asked about openness and transparency in terms of the companies that we engaged as the Commission for Gender Equality. Chair, I must say that, yes, the Commission for Gender Equality each year would actually handpick the organizations, either private sector companies or public sector companies that we will engage and conduct our transformation investigations as well as our transformation hearings. I will just make reference to the companies that we picked up in 2016, 2017, for an example, that we engaged, and I'm quite aware that we are interested in the private sector companies that we deal or we have dealt with. And the purpose of our work, basically, Chair, is to make sure that when we engage these companies, there's quite a lot of work that we look at, and the aim of the hearings is to assess the impact of the employment equity and look at the private sector and whether these private sector are accountable or are compliant with the legislation. And the Commission concedes that it's easier to transform companies in terms of race, but it's very difficult to transform companies in terms of gender. The hearings basically are part of spaces where we actually make sure that there is awareness raising around national legislations, relevant international commitments. And I must quickly just go to the list, Chair. For an example, in 2016, 2017, that financial year, we actually looked at small as well as big private sector companies. Amongst those companies, Chair, we looked at the Mercedes-Benz of South Africa. We looked at Pick n Pay. We looked at Rose Food Group. We looked at the 5 big construction companies. We looked at Tiger Brands. We looked at Fermule and Build It, which is based in Free State. We looked at SABC Miller, the Kloppers, the Sasol, the OVK, the Hall & Sons, the Mafeking Toyota, and the Johnson Workwear. This is just to mention very few that we picked up for that particular financial year, Chairperson, but I think we actually dealt with more than a dozen, more than 12 private sector companies that we worked with during the financial year. And Chairperson, I must also say that one of the things that we ascertained was to actually look at the vulnerabilities and the risks experienced by women and people or persons with disabilities across the sector, especially how they are able to actually move up the ladder in terms of making sure that the skills, they are upskilled and they are able to actually occupy positions at a higher managerial level. And finally, Chair, from my side, I just want to say that we did identify some challenges that are encountered generally by the private sector companies. And some of those are really, issues that are looking at the inability of the private sector to actually achieve equity targets for women as well as persons with disabilities. And again, there are legislations that are out there, but you will find that the public sector companies are aware of those legislations, but the implementation thereof is one of the challenging areas, especially for public sector companies. And generally, I can say that we as the Commission for Gender Equality, we are continuously making follow-ups just to make sure that we look at how those companies that we have engaged are able to assess themselves and measure themselves in terms of achieving gender transformation and achieving race and achieving disability targets that have been set. And I must also say that, Chair, most of our findings have been shared with the Employment Equity Commission as well as the Department of Labor. So that's basically our work, and this is the work that we are continuously doing every financial year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and your team. I think I just want to check if there are any questions from honorable members. By the looks, it's not from my side. I will humbly request that I think you did mention that there are workplaces where there is a practice of male getting more salaries than you mentioned. Only one, which was mining. Is it possible for you to which other sector is having having that, so that if you don't have those now, we will then, as the committee, request that if that can be circulated to the committee secretary, Mr. Sakaza, for us just to have that that brief. And no, thank you very much. It's quite an interesting presentation and responses. But if you do, you allow members of the committee, the citizenry, to say to you, like a whistleblower, can you please go and look into this sector? It has got some red lights in terms of employment equity. Should a person do that in writing, or can a person just pick up a phone and say, can this company be called, or this sector be called in front of you as the Gender Commission to clarify some of the practices that they're having and why they're not implementing the acts that are there? Can a person do that? Chair, whoever can respond, or your deputy, or Mr. Matotoka, whoever.
Yeah, I'll come in after you, Dennis. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I wanted to request my chair or the deputy chair to come in on that. Largely, we do get complaints. We allow people to walk in our offices and lodge complaints. But specifically on this question, I just wanted to request my deputy chair to just come in on this one and advise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dundra. Sorry, there's something, my video, it's showing the image, but there seem to be, yeah, there seem to be a problem. It goes on and off. But I think, Honorable Dundra, you are correct that the recourse for non-compliance is what is a problem. And I think that given our mandate, we're able to at least oversee and monitor if recourse is appropriate and measurable to the level of discrimination that occurs. The second thing is that, is there appropriate sanction for non-compliance? So with the Commission of Employment Equity, when they do the analysis of reporting of transformation targets and penalties for non-compliance, the failure to reach the mandated targets and the penalties, what we're seeing is that it's not commensurate to change the behavior. So this is where then the Act and the bills need to look at, is the fine and the commensurate, I would say, harsh action or response adequate in line with the behavior of companies and corporates. And what you are seeing is that it's unlikely to be sufficient. It's not adequate. And I think this is where the bill and the amendments to the bill need to look at. How do you make sure that the mitigation action or the recourse is actually a deterrent for future gender wage gap, for future discrimination, where there is equality in terms of work experience and qualification and all the other type of indices that you would measure to determine a salary or compensation of your staff. So this is where I think we need to put greater emphasis on the recourse, because we do come with findings. We do come with outcomes, as Chairperson has said, that company X, company Y, we look at broader issues around gender equality and not just gender wage gap. But for the gender wage gap, you can look at doing pay audits, because you actually need to look at data and look at the level of qualification, as Honorable Mkondo has said, and look at the level of employment and work experience and other factors that determine these outcomes. But even having looked at those, you will find that there is this outcome. So I think the third thing that I think we as the Gender Commission could potentially look at is looking at working in particular, emphasizing our partnership with the Department of Labor and emphasizing our partnership with the Commission of Employment Equity, wherein there are discrepancies. Because ours goes only so far in according to the CG Act, but we can definitely work in partnership and make sure that not only the recourse, but the legislation speaks to harsher sanctions to try and quell this behavior, and also forcing transparency to try and enable that people have access to information to prevent this type of incidences. And I think it's in line with the regulatory amendments that the committee is trying to try and hear from people like us.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Molikwe, and thank you very much, Chair of the SCGE. It's we will then now. I want to propose, honourable members, that we have a break. Now it's 1:15. We come back at 1:15. So that we get a presentation from the next presentation. And please, I would advise people not to log off, not unless they are going to be able to log in again. And I just want to check from Mr. Sakaza if we will then be, if we do log out, will we be using the same link?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. If people want to log out, they can log out, but they must please log in again with the same link. From my side, I'm not going to end the meeting. I'll just pause it, the recording, but then I will again at 1:15. But people, if one they leave, they can leave, but they will use the same link, Chair.
Okay. We'll be back at 1:15, honorable members and our guests. Let's meet at 1:15. Just get something and let's scratch, and then we get the next presentation. Thank you very much. See you at 1:15.
Thanks, Chair.
Hello? Is there anybody there?
Yes, we are here.
Yes, welcome back. We're still waiting for Chair.
My apologies, honorable members. I'm back. Honorable Sakaza.
Yes, Chair, we're waiting for you to resume.
Sorry for that. Sorry for that, honorable members. Can we then get the next, welcoming everybody back, can we then get the next presenter? And can the presenter show his or her face, please? Can you unmute Mr. Parks?
Sure. Afternoon, Comrade Chair, and afternoon, honorable members. Yes, so I think we're next presenting Chairperson. So I can start if you want.
Yes, please. You may start.
Cool. I'm just going to share the
screen. Tell us
screen.
who you are.
Yes.
You tell us who you are, and yeah.
Okay. No, thanks, Chair, and thanks to members. My name is Matthew Parks. I'm from the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. And just here on behalf of COSATU and our 17 affiliate unions to present our views on the Employment Equity Bill. And in essence, Chair, as COSATU, we support this bill. We think it is correct, it's rational, it's in line with the Constitution, it's progressive, and it's long overdue. But let me just share my PowerPoint presentation, Chair. And hopefully it shouldn't take too long to do so. I'm hoping you can see it, Chair. Yes, okay.
You can see it.
Sorry, some of us are still catching up with technology, Comrade Chair. It's a learning experience for all of us. So Chair, look, yeah, as COSATU, we support this bill. We welcome it, we support it in full, and we don't have any problems with any of its provisions. We had participated, Chair, as COSATU extensively in the deliberations on it at NETLAC in 2018 and 2019 with our colleagues from the other trade union federations, as well as our colleagues in business in the Department of Labor. And I think we want to appreciate the progressive and the open approach that the department took to these engagements and the constructive approach they took to proposals from business and from labor to strengthen it, etc. Chairs, COSATU, we believe that this is a critical amendment bill. It's not a new act, but it's an amendment bill of an existing act. We think it is going to strengthen government to achieve the progressive targets of the Mother Act, the Employment Equity Act. And I think I'll go into some detail about why we support the different provisions of the bill. But I must also say, Chair, maybe it's important for us to take a step back, having listened to the various submissions earlier this morning on the bill. I think also listening to some of the public comments as well. I think, Chair, maybe it's important, Chair, to appreciate that this is South Africa. We're not Switzerland, we're not Sweden. We have a very painful legacy of apartheid and colonialism of almost 4 centuries. We're still known today as one of the most unequal nations in the world. And I think any cursory look at our employment equity reports of most companies shows you how far behind we are towards addressing this legacy of apartheid. I think, Chair, in the public service, you find significant progress towards meeting the employment equity targets. But if we are to be honest, in the private sector, many employers are found wanting, whether it's at a sectoral level, whether it's at a regional level, or at an occupation-specific level. And hence, I think this is the need why we need to have this employment equity bill to further strengthen the act and further strengthen government's capacity, but also to put pressure on the employers who are the real ones who must deliver this change. But Chair, failure to address the legacy of apartheid is just a ticking time bomb. We only need to look at Zimbabwe and other countries. What are the consequences if you don't address the legacy of apartheid and colonialism? It's better to do it now and to do it in an inclusive way, as opposed to simply putting on blinders and denying the realities. Chair, apartheid didn't disappear simply because of our vote in 1994. The legacies still haunt us, and we need to address them. It's quite worrying that some critics of the bill don't recognize these painful legacies that most workers, especially African and colored and women, persons with disability, face on a daily basis. To simply say that the market economy will address these issues is a fallacy. It's a myth. If that is true, then we will not have this problem at all. We're 27 years into democracy, we have a free market economy, and it's been clear that the market alone cannot address these things. We have to nudge it along, we have to require these interventions if we're serious about it. But equally, Chair, we don't think this, despite what some prophets of doom or snake oil salesmen will tell you, this is not going to collapse the economy, it's not going to cause job losses. It is a tweaking of an existing law, and it's doing it in a fair and a rational way. And to be honest, Chair, any employer who struggles has always got the right under all the laws to apply to the Department for exemptions, for condonation, for breathing spaces. I think as the department has said earlier, that this does not even apply to employers employing less than 50 persons, which is the majority of employers. It's targeting the medium and the large employers. So I really think, Chair, for people to raise hysteria is not doing justice to what should be a constructive and a progressive debate. Chair, in terms of the specific provisions of the bill, we welcome the provisions linking it to the National Minimum Wage Act. This is critical to provide synergy because the two are intrinsically linked and complementary. And it provides a useful tool to hold employers accountable for their compliance with the Minimum Wage Act. I think we still experience 2 years down the road, many employers who still ignore the Minimum Wage Act, and I think linking it to the employment equity where there's a reporting requirement will help to further strengthen compliance with the national minimum wage. Again, Chair, we had many prophets of doom running around the country when the minimum wage was introduced, claiming this would lead to millions of job losses. And in fact, independent research has shown that it actually has not done that. It's actually helped to uplift people, and it's helped to redistribute wealth in a progressive way. Chair, if you listen to the critics of this bill, they will tell you this bill is the worst thing ever. But many of the provisions of the bill are fairly straightforward and common sense. The provision of expanding the definition of disabilities to include persons with intellectual disabilities or sensory disabilities, how can anybody possibly oppose that? It's correct and it's long overdue, Chair. So again, Chair, we are dumbfounded to find people are crying alarms when no alarms are required. Chair, probably the most controversial and heated parts of the bill are on the sectoral targets, which empowers the Minister of Employment and Labour to provide economic sectoral targets. We think that's critical, Chair. Not all sectors are the same. Many sectors have made significant progress. For example, the public sector, by and large, has made significant progress. But there are sectors which are notoriously far, far behind. We can look at the financial services sector. We can look at the mining sector, parts of the retail sector, and so forth. And so it's useful to have this clause empowering the minister to set different targets according to sectors, because you don't need a one-size-fits-all approach. If those who are far behind need to be nudged along, this is a useful tool. Those who have made significant progress, you can give them breathing space because they're clearly there on the right path. Chair, I think the specific targets, and I was quite amazed to hear some of the comments earlier, and I'm not sure if everybody has fully grasped the flexibility and the nuances of the bill, but the provisions allow for the minister to set specific targets according to occupational level, according to regional or sub-regional level. Again, this is welcome because you often find that certain occupations remain far behind. We know that most low-skilled jobs are overwhelmingly held by Africans. Cleaning jobs virtually only by African and colored women. Again, managerial posts in the private sector, overwhelmingly white male. So there's a need for a nuanced approach, which we think the bill does provide and empower the minister to do. And again, we can hold the minister accountable if he doesn't do it. Chair, we would agree with Sakeliga when they said you need to have a flexible approach around regional and sub-regional diversity. That is correct. We all know the diversity of South Africa's population, that the Western Cape's demographics and the Northern Cape's demographics are very different from those of KwaZulu-Natal, which are very different from those of Gauteng and of course Limpopo. So yes, you do need to have a flexible approach. You need to have sufficient space for the minister, as the bill provides, to have a variation. So you wouldn't want to have the minister being constrained to only have one set of targets, because Limpopo's demographics, where 97% are African, are very different from the Western Cape, where 50% of the population is colored, for example. So we think the bill provisions provide that flexibility and that space for the minister to allow for regional and for sub-regional targets. And that's a welcome approach, Chair. we don't think it goes the Jimmy Manyi approach, which we wouldn't support. We think, in fact, it does the opposite, and it gives government the space to provide the diversity that South Africa is endowed with. I can put it that way, Chair. So we're comfortable with that, Chair. Chair, we do think also, I think I've covered this issues, Chair. But I think, Chair, why we support this clause is because we don't think it provides a single blanket uniform approach, which wouldn't work. A one-size-fits-all approach would cause social strife, and we think this provisions gives us the required flexibility for the minister. But also, Chair, I think some of the comments were earlier that the minister would sit in his office and just thumb suck stats, targets, out of nowhere. But if you look at the bill, it actually says the minister needs to engage the Employment Equity Commission beforehand. On the commission, you have business, you have labor, you have government. So these are not going to be randomly chosen targets. He would have to, or she would have to, engage the commission, and there would need to be a rational basis for these. And of course, business and labor would be consulted on them. So it's an inclusive approach, which we think is the correct one, Chair. Chair, the bill also requires employers, when they look at the employment equity reports and they draft their plans, etc., to consult with trade unions. I think any effort like this, which is going to strengthen collective bargaining, will help to encourage labor market stability. Labor market stability, Chair, for us is critical to ensuring a productive workplace, a productive economy. And if we strengthen relations and address the issues of trust, we strengthen communication between workers and unions and employers, it can really help all of us to move this economy forward. Chair, the provisions on the annual reports, which require employers to report on matters related to collective bargaining, to compliance with the Minimum Wage Act, its provisions, as well as the sectoral determinations, we think, Chair, those are rational. We welcome them. And we think this will help to ensure compliance with the obligations of the law. We can't merely rely upon good wishes. We need to be moving towards a law-based society where people know what are the obligations, and slowly you will start entrenching a culture where people do it proactively on their own. Chair, with regards to the provisions on the labor inspectors, these are critical tools of making sure our labor laws, all of them, are adhered to. We think the provisions empowering the labor inspectors around inspections, issuing compliance orders, etc., around the Employment Equity Act provisions are logical. They're in sync with the existing provisions in the law on inspectors. And again, this is going to help to ensure those provisions have the necessary teeth, that inspectors are empowered to move things along. And again, Chair, whilst most employers will abide by the law, there always are those which are recalcitrant, and this will help to nudge them along. Chair, one of the provisions which we are most supportive of is around the compliance certificates. We see the compliance certificates issued by the minister are logical and rational. We don't think they're onerous. They simply say, if you look at the act, or the bill rather, an employer should be in compliance with the sectoral targets. They should have met the reporting requirements. They should not have been found in the past 3 years guilty of any unfair discrimination or having failed to pay at least at the level of the minimum wage. We're not sure what is complicated about that. That's a fairly simple thing, and most HR departments would not struggle to do this. And I think even in the bill, they've shown some flexibility for reporting dates, etc. Our only concern here, Chair, is I think as in the admission in the bill, is for the Department of Labour to operationalize this, and for Treasury, DPSA to assist in their own aspects of making sure it comes into effect. But Chair, I think also on this issue, sorry, I've not included it here, but I meant to, is that any employer who wants to do business with the state should have this compliance certificate. Business with the state means you're being funded by workers' taxes. Workers' taxes should not be used to fund employers who don't abide by the labor laws. Tenders, if you want to receive them, then we should be using them to encourage all employers to abide by the labor laws, to embrace the spirit of good labor relations. If you can do that, Chair, we think this will help move it along. But again, Chair, we've had experience before, for example, the Minimum Wage Act, where Treasury has still yet to operationalize the obligation of being in line with the Minimum Wage Act to receiving tenders from the state. Chair, but I think also to make the point last on that issue, is that workers will be productive. They'll be motivated if employers treat them decently. If employers respect their labor rights, if they pay them a living wage, those workers will be productive. That will help that workplace to thrive and to grow the economy. To simply suppress these issues is actually going to do the opposite. So in conclusion, Chair, and I think we want to just state again as COSATU, we strongly support this employment equity bill. We believe that it's progressive. We think it will help to address some of the remaining legacies of discrimination. But also, Chair, we always look at, is a law fair and rational? We feel this law is. We believe it's going to help empower the state to deal with obstinate employers. But equally, Chair, we think it does provide for the necessary accommodation for regional demographic diversity. And this is always a matter which requires sensitivity. It doesn't require hysteria or alarm bells or misinformation. Chair, we think it is fundamental that any business wanting to do business with the state must be required to have these compliance certificates, to be in good standing with the labor laws and embracing good labor practices. So in conclusion, Honourable Chair and members, we want to urge Parliament to prioritize this bill, to pass it as soon as possible. We would want to also urge Parliament to defend the progressive provisions of this bill. We should not be convinced by those prophets of doom that we need to cancel the bill, that the timing is wrong, that we need to weaken it or gut it or delete provisions. We're not sure when would the time be right, but the longer you take, the more difficult it's going to become, the more problematic it's going to be. This bill has taken about 2 years to reach Parliament, Chair. We were frustrated with that delay, but we're glad it is here, and we're hopeful that Parliament will conclude it during the course of this year so that it could come into effect from the beginning of next year. So that's our presentation in submission, Chair, and just to thank members for giving us space as COSATU to share our views. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Community Parks. We welcome your presentation as we have done in all the other presentations. Honourable members, any questions of clarity? Honourable Dana, Honourable Kado, any others? Honourable Mkonto. Then it will then be Honourable Dunjwa. Honourable Dana.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Parks, for the presentation. I just have one question, and it's with regards to, I think it was your slide 6, the sectoral targets and the provisions allowing Minister to specify targets according to occupational, regional, and sub-regional needs is further welcomed. I'd just like to gain your insight on the fact that, in essence, the amendment bill as is basically gives the Minister unlimited and undefined discretion to set these targets. And I would like to know if you think that it's sensible or advisable for the Minister to not have defined discretion in this case when setting sectoral targets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Dana. Honourable Kado.
Thank you, Chair. We heard in an earlier submission that most employment equity beneficiaries come from the most advantaged group within the Black population, the roughly 15% with the best skills and sometimes and often the best political connections. I wanted to ask Mr. Parks, what do you say to the criticism that the Employment Equity Amendment Bill will help only a relatively small elite within the previously disadvantaged group, what an earlier speaker referred to as the creamy layer? And then secondly, do you not think that there could be potential disemployment effects if the bill is implemented as it stands? Surely a case could be made that if it has to comply with the various additional burdens that are imposed upon them by this amended legislation, that there would be an incentive for them not to create more jobs? And how would you respond to that particular line of criticism? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kado. Honorable Mkondo.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome the presentation from Mr. Parks. Chair, my first question will be on the implementation strategies. He talked about reporting requirements. How are they going to make sure that what is being reported about is a true reflection of exactly what is going on in institutions and companies? Number two, I think he knows himself that his organization is said to be a culprit in promotion of cadre deployment, nepotism, and favoritism in some of their affiliates. So how are they going to make sure that those things are dealt away with? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, honourable members. Mr. Parks, you listened in the previous presentations, and I just want to pick one thing which was raised by Institute of Race Relations, that employment equity did take place in the public sector, but with that there have been challenges, and therefore they wouldn't like those to be inherited in the private sector, meaning that I think I did say that that's Dr. Peffer means that no, private sector must just be left as it is for it to do the process of equity in their own way. They must not be subjected to any law. What will then be your view about that? And secondly, in terms of the way forward, there was then a challenge of an issue about the issue of what is this thing that was called, that is to be given to people for housing, education, vouchers. What will be COSATU's views on that? Because I'm of the understanding that when institutions are in front of the committee and given an opportunity to make their views, in particular around the issue of the bill, we will just get the feel and the views of those that have been listening. So I just want to get your view on that. I think those will only be my light. Oh, the last one is that I would have thought that you will unpack the discrimination part by the employer in terms of a number of things. People are discriminated according to race, gender, class, and there are sectors that are still discriminating women in terms of wages. Would it have not been important that as COSATU you unpack that, so that as we will be engaged in the process, we are able to be pointed and say the the Congress of South African Trade Union has also identified these companies that are discriminating in line with what the Stats SA has unpacked. Those will be my questions of clarity to you, sir. Thank you very much. Over to you for the response.
Okay. No, thanks very much, Chair, and honourable members, for the questions. Yeah. Look, I think if I start with yourself, Honourable Chair, I mean, for us, the very last point is precisely why we need this amendment bill, is to say that 27 years down the road into democracy, we made progress in some areas, for example, the public service, at all salary bands. But there are many other offending sectors, regions, occupational levels, etc., which are far behind. And it's clear that we don't need a one-size-fits-all blunt instrument approach. We need a more nuanced surgical approach. And we think this bill does provide it. Because you're right, Chair, if you look at the Stats SA, you will find the huge anomalies. You'll find in the public service, the wage gap, for example, is 1 to 13. In the private sector, it's 3 times that amount. You will find no Black women CEOs in the mining industry or the retail sector. You will find most management in the financial services sector white male. So it clearly is an alarm bell, Chair. We're amazed that those who don't like this bill don't offer any solutions, because until now, it's been largely allowed up to the free market to address, and they have not addressed it. So to say we don't want any interventions is another word to say we're happy with the status quo. Let's continue with it. We're all right that we're not fundamentally transforming South Africa's demographic profiles. Chair, I didn't understand. I listened to the presentation this morning on the Institute for Race Relations. I must confess I couldn't understand why they were raising the issue of RDP housing, social grants, vouchers, whatever, with employment equity. They're very different things. We want people to have jobs. We want people to have a full career opportunity. We don't want people to be held back simply because they were born by an accident of nature, a woman or African or colored or whatever. We want to open up the full career opportunities for people. So I'm not sure how we link it to RDP housing, social grants. To me, that smacks of the worst type of liberal patriarchy, paternalism. I found it quite shocking, to be honest, and to be frank, very condescending. I must say, Chair, to be honest with you, I don't have much sympathy with the Institute for Race Relations. Going back, if you recall, in the 80s, they were very soft on the issue of apartheid. They were amongst those who supported a qualified franchise only for Africans with certain income levels and educational levels, not for the ordinary resident of a township. You could say very comfortably they were a soft approach on apartheid. I could only see it as a subtle form of racism to say that employment equity in the state has brought about the crisis in the state that we see today. To me, that was quite shocking. I couldn't see anything besides racism. How you equate having African or colored or women people in the public service being responsible for state capture, for collapse. The two are not the same. And to equate the two, to be honest, is racism. The collapse of SOEs, of the state, of municipalities, is because of corruption, state capture, not because of the color of the skin. There are people who are white, who are male, who participate in looting. And you have criminal laws to deal with those issues. Employment equity is about diversity at the workplace. It's not about corruption, state capture, etc. But equally, Chair, we think also it's a distortion to say corruption only exists in the state. Fidentia, where workers' pension money was stolen. Steinhoff, where workers' pension money was stolen. That's the private sector, done unfortunately by white males. So it's very unfortunate, Chair, to have that kind of a approach. But we accept democracy, and in democracy, people can say whatever they want, even if it's offensive, to be honest. Chair, I think to Honourable Denner's comments, just to thank Honourable Denner. Look, I think for us, the bill doesn't give a blank check to the minister, and we would never want any situation where any minister is given a blank check. When we draft laws, we mustn't draft just today because the minister is our friend, we trust him, he's a nice chap. We must also draft laws that down the road you will have a very undesirable person as a minister who can abuse the powers. So we think, Chair, the way it's crafted, and obviously the regulations which will be drafted by the department afterwards would specify further technical details, but it doesn't give him blank checks. He must be in compliance with employment equity objectives, must be in compliance with the Constitution. So the Constitution is not going to allow you to say a workplace can only be of one race or one gender. That would be clearly unconstitutional. It says you must reflect the demographic diversity of the country. We think the bill does actually provide further flexibility by bringing on board regional and sub-regional, sectoral and occupational level variations. But of course, Chair, I think the bill also says he must or she must, as a minister, consult the Employment Equity Commission, again, where employers, where labor are represented. So again, it's not a blank check. But I think, Chair, also anybody who is aggrieved has always got the right to go to the Constitutional Court or any other court if they think the minister has erred. And, you know, our courts have shown themselves to be independent and have not been afraid to send ministers or parliament or government packing when they feel they have misinterpreted the laws or abused their position. But Chair, look, I think also we must not also demonize employment equity. It goes both ways. So, you know, for example, COSATU is an employer of COSATU staff. We also have to submit our reports to say how many white people do we have at which levels. So it goes both ways. It's not just simply a tool to advance one particular group. It's a tool to make sure that we are inclusive of the entire nation with our demographic, our gender diversity, etc. I think to Honorable Cardo, no, look, we hear that the issue of black elites benefiting. And look, sure, so, you know, a DG post would benefit an elite, sure. But if you look at this, what Honorable Dunjwa is saying, there's specific sectors, occupations are far behind, and those are the disadvantaged working class, middle class, Africans, colored women, etc. And this is why you need a further tightening of the bill to address those anomalies. We can't simply stop something because it's benefiting an elite. There are many things in law which benefit an elite. Doesn't mean we mustn't work harder to make sure the working class and middle class benefit. And I think that's why for us, Chair, the sectoral targets are critical. Because if you look at the retail sector, cashiers are all women, African and colored. Cleaning and security guards, all African and colored. But the top levels, overwhelmingly white and male. And it shows you we have to address these issues. Look, Chair, I mean, I think the other point of Honorable Cardo, as COSATU, we're very sensitive to the issue of any possible impact upon jobs. We're not delusional, we're not drunk on our Kool-Aid, we're not running around thinking that slogans can resolve issues. But we don't see anything in this bill which would threaten a single job. It's not a new act, it's building upon an existing act which has been around for many, many years. There's nothing fundamentally intrusive in it which would add an additional administrative burden to any employer. And in fact, if you employ less than 50 people, you don't even have to worry about it. You're given that space, etc. But Chair, an investor, I think, would be more concerned about South Africa's long-term social cohesion and stability. Are we addressing our fundamental fault lines as a nation, including employment equity, or are we just simply sweeping stuff under the carpet? And I think, Chair, we would rather address our fundamental crises than to pretend they don't exist. I think the last honourable member, Chair, was Honourable Mkondo. What is the task of unions to ensure compliance in the workplace? I mean, look, obviously, unions have a critical role to play across federations, across affiliates, to make sure the employers are in compliance with the Employment Equity Act. That's also why we specifically welcome the provision requiring employers to consult with unions and with workers at the workplace. So they also play their role in making sure it's this. Chair, I'm not sure about the issue of catered deployment. COSATU doesn't appoint people in the public service, in government, etc. As an alliance partner, yes, we are consulted, for example, on the formation of national cabinet, but beyond that, we don't have much say. But anyway, even if we did, Chair, the laws apply to at all levels of the state. And if we are found wanting at any stage, then we can be held according to the law. Equally, Chair, the employment equity applies to us as unions, as employers. And if any union, irrespective of the color of the T-shirt, is found by the Department of Employment and Labor not to be complying, the Department of Labour will give them a warning and instruct them to comply. And if they fail to do so, they will implement the necessary provisions to do so. And Chair, you have seen many unions, even inside COSATU, who have been hauled over the coals by the register of the Department of Labour. So we're not given a get out of jail free card. Just like other employers are held to account, we correctly are also held to account. I hope I've answered the questions, Honourable Chair, and thank you to members and Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Matthew. I will assume, Honourable Mkondo, that that's an old hand. Honourable Mkondo? Okay. Okay. Now, honourable members, I think those, if I'm correct, Mr. Sakaza, COSATU was going to be the last presenter for the day. Am I correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Oh, okay. All right. So, honourable members, I think this is the last group of public hearings for today. We are again starting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And to those that we have requested some information, we will some information just to strengthen what they have then said. We will allow that. So there are some areas where we need to just check with the legal people if then some of the issues that were raised are issues that are in order, so that we don't find ourselves being taken to court. Yes, Comrade Parks, we will try our level best that we pass this bill by the end of this year. But what I always say to people and to members is that I'm one chair who does not want to rush a bill. Obviously, I don't want to drag it either, so that we close all the loopholes that may create a challenge for us. Fortunately, this is Section 75, and therefore from here it will then go to NCOP. But we are to do our level best, ensure that we accommodate everybody within the framework of the rules and what it says in terms of people who want to come and make submissions. We know that the written submissions, that process has been closed, but they are people, we also accommodated extensions. Now we are accommodating those institutions and companies and individuals who wanted to come and make oral submissions. That's where we are now, which is going to take us up to next week, hopefully, depending on either the length and the questions that are then being asked, even if it's 1.5 hours. But if questions and issues that are being raised are taking us beyond a 1.5 hour, we'll have to be patient and accommodative, so that tomorrow we are not taken to court that no, I was discriminated against, I was only given an 1.5 hours when I have more time, if more issues to raise. If people do say that upfront, we'll have to accommodate that. Having said that, honorable members, thank you very much for your understanding and your patience. You are still to do your constituency work within the framework of what your political principles are saying. But tomorrow we are to come again at 9 o'clock. We will then be given the link. Every day we'll be given a link for the next day. So the admin staff through Mr. Sakaza know that that's what they are to do. Mine is just to ensure that that is happening. So Please, Mr. Sakaza, I'm not expecting any person to call me and ask me for a link. Please, at a particular time, communicate. You know how to communicate with members in terms of having the link. And yeah, thank you very much. It was quite an interesting first day, which was setting the bar very up. But yeah, until we meet again tomorrow at 9 o'clock, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Greatly
Chair.
appreciated. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
everyone. Thank
I'm
you.
still waiting for my chocolates.
You get it. Don't worry. You got to keep holding on.
Yeah, I will. Patience is virtue. Bye.
Bye.
Chair, I do have some chocolate for you.
Please. I don't know now this struggle in the DA of chocolates and the chair, but I will leave it to you people. I want my chocolates.
I'll be quick.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mama.
So, welcome, Miss Isaacs. I see you towards the end. I will give you a call just now, ne?
Chairperson.
You look good.